Hello, Kanurit Beat. My name is Paula Siksik, and I work at the Alaska Native Heritage Center. Introduction to Alaska Native Cultures. Objectives: demonstrate an understanding of the unique characteristics of the 5 main Alaska Native cultural groups. Demonstrate an awareness of the geographical locations for the main Alaska Native cultural groups. For thousands of years, the traditional knowledge and skills of Alaska Native people have been passed on by word of mouth and handed down from generation to generation. Historically, inhabitants from each region throughout the state developed unique values, skills, and traditions based on their relationship to the land and sea, and the resources that both provided. In order to gain a greater comprehension of this history, it is important to understand what we mean when we refer to Native culture. By definition, culture refers to the behaviors, beliefs, and characteristics of a particular social, ethnic, or age group. The sum total of ways of living built up by a group of human beings and transmitted from one generation to another. Some common characteristics of culture include language, arts, beliefs, clothing, housing, and technology. While Alaska Native culture has evolved over time, it still retains its natural, physical, and spiritual connections and relationship with the environment. It is this relationship between people and the environment that is the ultimate expression of Alaska Native culture. Within Alaska, there are 11 main Native cultures. These 11 cultures have been organized into 5 groups based on language and geographic representation. Unangach, also referred to as Aleut and Alutiiq, along the south central and southwest coast of Alaska. Tlingit, Eyak, Haida, and Tsimshian along the south central and southeast coast of Alaska. Yupik and Chupik of western Alaska. Athabaskan in interior Alaska. Inupiaq and St. Lawrence Yupik in the Arctic and along the Arctic coast.
Chumai, Koyanisnak de Luchi Atka Lising Outchumak, Shutlayanga Tsunami, Ilanka Gwenech Kamut Sunakamut Flu. Well, thanks for having me here today. My name's Lauren, and my native name is Lising Outchumak. And I was born in Kodiak, and my dad is from Kodiak, my mom's from the island of Afognak. I'm from Kodiak Island, which is right down here in the Gulf of Alaska, and the island of Afognak is just above it. The purple in this area is Sukbiak, or also known as Alutiiq, but also a word that more people probably will be familiar with is the word Aleut. And but that also includes the Unanga, which is on the Aleutian Islands down towards, of course, the Aleutian chain there, all the way out towards Kamchatka or Chukotka on the other side in Russia. And one term that we use for all of us is the word Aleut, although we're definitely going away from that term, and I'll explain a little bit about in the history. But right now, again, I'm from Kodiak, and that's Afognak. Sukbiak go from the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, Afognak, Lower Kenai Peninsula, and Prince William Sound, whereas the Unanga stretch all the way out into Aleutian Islands. Probably the one thing that defines us is our kayak. And one of my favorite things to talk about is I ask guests that come, to the Heritage Center, what's the native word for kayak? And you'll see them like really thinking and go, I don't know. And then I have to drop the bomb on them. It's kayak. The kayak is not just a boat, it's a way of life. It's a tool. It's a living thing, of course, based upon our culture. It has a spirit. And if a man didn't have a kayak, he couldn't support his family. And, people today think that, well, Kodiak has deer and elk and mountain goats, so you could hunt on Kodiak. But before, of course, the United States came, again, the only mammals on Kodiak were, well, the main mammals that we think about, human beings and bears. And in my village, we didn't really hunt bear or eat bear, but the sea mammals were more important. And so the kayak, again, it's based upon the user's body dimensions, 3 of their arm lengths. The hatch is based upon, from their fingertip to their armpit. Our garments are not the stereotypical parka, although they are more designed for rain. The parka has strips of seal intestine, and oftentimes when people see our regalia, it's unmistakable because you'll see a lot of tassels. Now the tassels are on there because it's kind of like an automobile where if it has a larger radiator, it has a larger cooling capacity, so it can run longer or stay cool at a constant temperature, whereas the tassels actually increase the surface area of the garment. And with more surface area, it can dry quicker. And if you've ever been to Kodiak, it's a very wet, temperate, rainforest on the north end and the whole island. And, it's waterproof garments are very essential, for living on this area here. Food for me growing up, I thought I never really grew up with native food, but it's funny how we incorporate new things into our culture. Like we have a fish pie that we use. It's called parok. And if you're not familiar with it, I call it a fish pie. It has, typical ones have cabbage, rice, pie crust on top, and it's baked, and it's, the proper way to eat it on Kodiak, of course, is with ketchup. And so, it's funny, most people aren't aware of that. Housing traditionally is what's called a chiklawak or a unglu. It's a subterranean house with dirt or sod piled on top of it. And they do range from, say, the Alaska Peninsula to Kodiak. Kodiak tended to be not just one single, living space, but they would have hallways that would lead off into multiple directions, and at each end of each tunnel would be another living quarters. One of the things that when the Russians arrived, they were very surprised at our knowledge of human anatomy. And, of course, people would say, well, how do you become familiar with human anatomy? And I guess to put it in simple terms, it's autopsies. That our ancestors actually were curious about how the human body works. And so when someone were to pass away, they would literally open someone up and look at the internal organs and see how they function. When I talk about our shaman, our kalashak, I don't mean like a witch doctor with a rattle, Of course, think of it more like a real doctor who's in charge of your mind, body, and spirit, to where they do have knowledge of medicines and the plants and do have techniques for antiseptic and stitching and using natural materials that even today, when the stitch goes in, it was made with sinew or animal tendon. And after a time, you know what it does? It dissolves away. And so it's pretty amazing that our ancestors were so advanced in their knowledge of human anatomy and medicine.
Sigmana, Sligidiget, Shimoigit, Gabawelsik, Tatni, Nigeta, Geltsup, Edit Gabet Grusk, Lu Am Godut Nuelt Nisum, Watsmoon Duayu, Ganhadidi Tegu, Will Akshtamadiak Duog, Watgu, Nigyok Stioltzagan. In my traditional language of Shimalgit, the language of the Tsimshian people, I said chiefs, matriarchs, councils of the chiefs, prince and princesses, everyone of the community and all the children. I'm very happy to see all of you today. My traditional name is Watsmu. In English, it means no ears or one who never listens. I'm Tsimshian from the Raven Clan. My family comes from Metlakatla. Our traditional village name is Will Akshta Madik, which means grizzly bear standing at the point looking out. And today I live here in Anchorage. I belong to the Tsimshian tribe from Metlakatla. They're located 15 miles south of Ketchikan on the southeast panhandle. We're closer to Seattle than we are Anchorage. And I'm going to share about the southeast tribes, which are Eyak, Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian. My mom is Tsimshian and Yupik, and she was born and raised in Metlakatla. My father is Tsimshian and Haida, and he's from Prince Rupert, British Columbia, Canada. So I'm Tsimshian and Haida from the southeast region, and I'm Yupik from the central part of Alaska. Southeast Alaska is a temperate rainforest, so we have very large cedar trees and Sitka spruce in our area of Alaska. In my language, our word for cedar is amgan, which means good wood because we had so many resources for it. We use it for our canoes, our large longhouses. Where I come from, we call them longhouses, but in the Tlingit and the Haida cultures, they call them clan houses. And We use them to carve totem poles to tell our stories and also document our family trees, our genealogy. And also just because our language wasn't written till about 50 or 60 years ago, that's how we documented our stories, so they were passed down generation to generation. We live off the land and the sea, so we have a lot of deer. The Thlinkit and the Haidas harvest seal. I know my ancestors harvest seals, but we don't harvest them today. I'm not sure exactly why. And we also do a lot of deer hunting and then fish and halibut. Our traditional clothing before Western contact was cedar bark. Women had cedar bark skirts and men had cedar bark tunics. With Western contact, we were given wool material to make clothing out of, but we didn't exactly understand what missionaries in Southeast Alaska, when they were giving us wool materials, what they wanted us to do with it. So we draped it over our shoulders, creating Kushna Butla, in my language, button robes, which we wear today. In Southeast Alaska, our food resources are off the land and sea, so we have a lot of salmon, halibut, clams and cockles, abalone. We have black seaweed just north in the northern part of Southeast Alaska. They harvest ribbon seaweed. The texture is a little different from black seaweed. And we also hunt deer as well. Towards the end, mid-summer season, we harvest different berries, salmon berries, which are high bush. I know in this area of Alaska, in Anchorage, everything's low bush, but in Southeast, everything's high bush. And in my opinion, it tastes better. The salmon berries in Southeast Alaska taste better. The ones from this region of Alaska seem a little tart to me. We have blueberries, huckleberries, cranberries in some areas of Southeast. We also have wild asparagus, which we harvest off of the beach. Traditionally, our homes were made all out of red cedar. Where I come from, we call them longhouses, but for the Thlinkit and the Haida tribes, they call them clan houses. In our longhouses, there were different levels. The level that you slept on determined your status. Lower status people occupied the bottom level. Their main job was maintaining the fire at all time. And the higher your status, the higher level that you slept on.
My name is Ayavilik, and in English, Maddox Metcalf. So I'll be speaking about the Inupiaq and the St. Lawrence Island Inupiaq over on the western coast of Alaska. Our terrain is tundra. There's no trees. It's Arctic and subarctic climate, so the winters are long, dark, and cold. Historically, St. Lawrence Island, our people extend into Russia, and the Inupiaq people extend all the way into Canada and Greenland. Historically, our cultures are marine mammal cultures. Our livelihood revolves around migration of whales, walrus, and seals. St. Lawrence Island was named by Vitus Bering, who was a Danish explorer working for the Russians, and he found or landed on the island on the day of St. Lawrence, so he named the island St. Lawrence. But traditionally, the name for the island in our language is called Sivukak, which means to wring out or to squeeze out. Inupiaq people, their language in Alaska has multiple dialects. The language as you go eastward into Canada and Greenland changes a little bit, so you can converse with them slightly. The languages on St. Lawrence Island, Siberian Yupik, we can converse with no problem with our relatives in Russia. Even today, our relatives, we're still related. We have many first cousins, relatives, that kind of stuff in Russia, so we meet with them still today. In the northern part of Alaska, we have two distinct languages. One is St. Lawrence Island Yupik, or Siberian Yupik, and the other language is the Inupiaq language. they come from the same language family, so you can understand maybe just a little bit. But words for animals and direction, those types of things are very similar. Most of our clothing is made from sea mammal or reindeer. Reindeer are kind of a new item brought to the island, but most of our clothing was made from various types of seal intestines, made for multiple reasons. Most of our clothing was used or made for everyday use, to keep you dry or to keep you warm. Our boots that we wore, women were constantly making soles of our boots and having to change them out. And of course, every different season we had a different type of boot to wear. Most of the diet along the coastal areas is sea mammal. In the very northern parts of Alaska, bowhead whale is one of the main sources of food, as well as walrus, various types of seals. In mainland communities, especially communities that are off the water, caribou are a big source of food. Those are the primary sources of food, along with various types of migratory birds, ducks, geese, seabirds along the coast. Our traditional housing were underground sod houses. So in most communities where individual families living in one house, you would dig your house into the ground, and the house could be built maybe 6 to 12 feet under the ground, and then lined with wood if you had enough driftwood, and then covered with sod or the earth. And then you would have benches along the edges, and that's where people would sleep. There was no fire pit, so the heat source would be body heat as well as steel oil lamps. But the traditional houses they're very energy efficient, so once they warm up, they stay warm for hours and hours, but it can take a while for them to warm up. But they're underground sod houses with tundra up on the top. One of our main modes of transportation when there's no ice and snow is a skin boat, which many communities still make a skin boat. So the frame would be driftwood. The Inupiaq people would primarily, up north, would use bearded seal skins to cover their skin boat. Farther south in the Inupiaq region, they would use a female walrus hide, as well as on St. Lawrence Island, cover their skin boats with female walrus hide. There were skin boats for hunting, and larger ones for travel. You would load as many people in your skin boat to travel. Smaller skin boats can hold 5 to 7 people plus 2 tons of cargo, so they're very, very durable boats. Art is a form of an individual's their expression of the world around them. So things are made for aesthetic purposes. So you made a tool for a certain thing, but you would decorate it, and it would be your interpretation of the world around you. So let's say a man made a drum, and his handle is not just a piece of wood, but he would carve that handle into the body of a seal. Maybe because he identified with that animal, or on the end of the handle would be a polar bear head, and it was a way for him or her to individualize their item that they're using.
Shojri Rochelle Adams Oji, Dinchijuk Shojri Gekij Adza Oji, Shitsu Chod Charlotte Adams Shojri Ilsai. Shiahanai Angela Peters Clifford Adams Govojri, Shiki Tikwanli Amea Kosods Athlea Dahan Govojri, Jukjat Inkrikwich Alaska Native Heritage Center and Jit Tuguchit Tugoth in Language Coordinator Ihli Anchorage School District Chan Shikuchit Tugoth in Gechuatan Ihli Cultural Enrichment Gogol. I said my name is Rochelle Adams. My native name is Gekij Adza, which means bouncing bunny, which was given to me by my great-grandma Charlotte Adams. My parents are Angela and Clifford Adams, and I have 3 children. Their names are Amea, Koso, and Tlea Dahan. I'm from Fort Yukon and Beaver, and now I live here in Anchorage. And I also said that I work here at the Alaska Native Heritage Center as a language coordinator, and I work for the Anchorage School District as a cultural enrichment teacher. Well, Gwich'in Athabascan, and on the map here of Alaska, there's all of this red is the Athabascans, and there's 11 different groups within the Athabascan region. And this is the group that I'm from, Gwich'in, which goes into Canada. So half are in Alaska, the other half of the Gwich'in are in Canada. And the villages that I'm from are Fort Yukon, and which is on the border of, or where the Porcupine and the Yukon River meet. And then also I'm from Beaver, which is right on the border of the Gwich'in and Koyukon Athabascan, which the Athabascan group covers a very large territory of the state, which is primarily the interior, and not really so much the coastal regions. And also down here in Anchorage is also Athabascan land. We have the Dena'ina group that is down here. The Athabascan diet, I would say moose is our top, and also the caribou, especially for the Gwich'in people, because our villages are all located along the migrational route of the Porcupine River caribou herd. So that was our main, source of food. And also our villages are all along the rivers, and so that was because so we could hunt the salmon, fish for the salmon in the summer when they come home. One of the main ways that we get our salmon is by building fish wheels, which were pretty high-tech engineering on our part. So I'm really happy. That's my favorite time of the year, is when we do our fishing. And so we're in the smokehouse a lot during July and doing our cutting and drying our fish and also jarring it and other ways of preservation. And I've also, just because how the salmon population has been going down, I don't want to throw anything away, and I don't want to waste. And so I've been tanning the fish skins, and it's actually a really old art form that is kind of dying out now. So I've been doing, wanting to preserve that, and I've taught myself how to tan salmon skin, and I make items out of it. So our traditional housing, well, we've had log cabins for a while, and I know that we used to have caribou skin huts, which would be like a frame made of willows, and then it would be covered with like caribou or moose skin with the hair still on it, and inside we would have like maybe a small fire or something to keep us warm. But that was like a nomadic home. And also when we started settling, we started building more log houses. But traditionally we were more nomadic and would actually follow the caribou herds and the patterns of the animals throughout the season. So Athabascan groups, we have different styles of beadwork, and you can really tell where an item was made from which region by the symbolism in the beadwork. Most of us all use floral patterns, and it gets more elaborate as you get further north with the beadwork. And with the Gwich'in, we have more symbolism, like we have ptarmigan tracks that you'll see throughout the beadwork, and what we call datsoj, and we have ptarmigan feathers, and just lots of symbolism in the beadwork. And by looking at it, if you're from the area and you see a piece of beadwork, you can even recognize which family made it, because everyone would have their own distinct style. The Athabascans are the ones who actually designed the snowshoes, and people are using that idea now all over the world. And so we just want to continue to be able to do it in the traditional way. So even if you go to like Walmart, you'll see like plastic snowshoes that are there. But those originally came from the Athabascan people.
Winga mangau naugwa dajir miunga mamaka pesinakak doi. I said that my name is Mangaun, named after my grandmother, and my mother's name is Pesinakak, from Dajak, which means Saint Michael. I was born in Nome. When I was 5, we moved to St. Michael, But we do have relatives over in Stebbins, which is only 8 miles away. So I consider both places my home. My grandmother moved from St. Michael to Stebbins and back and forth. And presently I have one sister in Stebbins, Marie, and another sister at St. Michael. And they both have their families there. And when I moved there when I was 5, when I arrived at St. Michael, I came into a family of about 21 people. And that included several grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren, aunts and uncles and cousins and in-laws and some adoptees. St. Michael has a lot of history. The Russians had a fort there, and as a result of that, we have a mixture of Yupik, Inupiaq, and Russian. And when the gold rush occurred in Nome, many of the boats that were traveling from the southern part of the United States stopped at St. Michael on their way to Nome. The language of St. Michael has been Inupiaq, Yupik, and Russian and English. And it has been said that my stepfather spoke Russian, English, Inupiaq, and Yupik. I heard him speak one time to someone that was in his circle. He spoke to someone in Yupik perfectly, and then to the next person he spoke perfectly in Inupiaq. The sealskin would be used for mostly mukluks and for the soles, and though there were some jackets and parkas that were made from the sealskin, mostly for the men. And the women wore lighter furs like this one I have. This one is mainly muskrat, which is around the village, and beaver is farther away, but it could be traded for. And then on the collar up here is wolf and wolverine, and these tassels are wolverine. The men's tools, some of them were from the bones of the seal and the whales, and also from the land animals. And those would be made into different scrapers and different kinds of tools the men needed in the men's house to make all their equipment. And while in the men's house, the younger boys who were 7, 8, 9 years old, when they were ready, would go in there to the men's house and observe what the men were making and visually remembered the way to make things. So our native people have used visual measurement memory for thousands of years because we didn't have any written language. And same with the women. When they made beautiful garments like this, they could look at different persons in their family or friends and make a garment for them by the memory of their different sizes. One of the initiations is done for members of the community in a village during a potlatch, which is entitled The First Dance. So when I was in my kind of late 30s and I went back to my village, my grandmother in Stebbins told me I must go over to Stebbins and practice dancing, native dancing. And as a result of that, I was assigned a certain dance, which she said that I would be dancing at my first dance initiation during the potlatch between Stebbins and Kotlik. Kotlik is another village about 2 hours away by snow machine. So that village comes over to Stebbins to enjoy the festivities, and they, take turns. One time it's in Stebbins, next time it's in Kotlik, and they keep doing that. And the hospitality for each of those villages is like a competition. So I remember we at Stebbins going over by snow machine to Cot Lake and offering rides to people who needed rides to come to the festival, to the potlatch. Before the potlatch, my grandmother told me that I must get some fish, which I had to buy because I didn't have any of my own. And she told me to bring gifts to give to the audience, which included the guests of honor from Cot Lake and the elders and the community members of Stebbins, and some from St. Michael, where I was from. So after I danced my assigned dance, and we wore a headdress like this and dance fans, and when my dance was done, our family of my grandmother, her son Ronnie, and I, and my nephew Karak, we passed out the gifts according to grandmother's direction as to where the gifts would go. So that is considered a potlatch festival, which still occurs today.
In Alaska, we are fortunate to have such a rich and vibrant set of unique and distinct cultures. We encourage you learn more from the many resources that are available. If you would like to learn more, you can contact the Alaska Native Heritage Center.